typical to a hairdressing business, and then you can work through that. You may have other risks, but it'll certainly get you in the right way, on the right path. Your COVID safety plans will talk about guidance materials, and there'll be question time at the end. So let's go through the assessment process. So the first thing we need to do is identify what our risks are. Why? Because we need to work out how they'll impact on our business, how they'll impact on our customers, how they'll impact on visitors coming into our workplace, like suppliers and those type of and maintenance men and other people who come in and do maintenance work in your workplace, and also on the continuity of your operation. It's not much good keeping everyone safe if you're not in business because of you can't survive. So what we want to do is factor in those issues and look at how we can mitigate those risks and keep the businesses operating. We're also going to go through conducting a risk assessment, which is about identifying what those risk factors are, working out what likelihood and consequence those factors will have on your business. We'll determine the gross risk, which is a concept we'll talk about when we get into the detail. We'll also talk about the application of controls and what things you can do to mitigate your risk. So when I talk about a control, I'm talking about the things that you can put in place in order to either limit the likelihood or the impact of something happening. And then we'll come up with a net risk, which is then the basis from which you can then work through and you can see how if there are any additional controls you need to implement. As part of that process, we'll work out where the public health directions fit in with a view that at the end of the day we have a COVID safety plan. So just looking at that picture, just follow the arrows. It shows that we go through that risk assessment process. We have input from our public health directions in regards to what those controls are, and then the output from that process are the controls which then make up your COVID safety plan, which is the things that you do in order to keep your business COVID safe. So we're going to work through this model in detail, pull together the boxes, and at the end of it I'm hoping you'll have a pretty good understanding around what you need to do and how you can go through about managing the risks. So the risk assessment process, what it does is enables you to identify how COVID may enter your workplace or be transmitted in your workplace. That's what we're trying to mitigate by going through the risk assessment process. So this is a methodical process that allows you to work your way through, identify those sources where it will come into your business, and then work through how you can reduce the impact on your business. It'll help you to also understand how this could impact on your business, because as you start to look at the consequences, it might mean that people go into isolation for a period of time. It may be that people need to go into quarantine. Obviously, that will have a big impact on a small business or a micro business. So we need to work through and get a bit of an understanding of what that looks like. The risk assessment process also helps you to decide whether the controls that you're implementing are adequate in reducing your risk, or whether by putting additional controls in, whether you're actually having an impact or not. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the risk assessment process. And we, as I said, I just mentioned the fact that you can actually assess the impact of any controls or additional processes you put in place in order to mitigate your risk. So let's get into the more detailed bit. So the first thing is, from a business point of view, we need to understand that close contacts are the things that will really hurt your business, because a close contact is when someone has been face-to-face with someone who's a confirmed COVID case during their infectious period, and as a contact of that, it's generally been for at least 15 minutes. So that's the definition that public health used to determine a close contact. If you become a close contact, then if you're a vaccinated person, then you're into quarantine for 7 days, and if you're unvaccinated, you're in quarantine for 14 days. So it's really important that in going through this risk assessment process, there are opportunities to minimise how many close contacts you have, minimise the duration of those contacts, and that will have an impact on your business. So it's a matter of analysing where those close contacts are now, and particularly those settings where there's lots of points of interaction where people cross over. Now, I'm sure you're all thinking, gee, I'm a hairdresser, I have close contact with every one of my customers. And I understand that, and we'll work through how we can potentially look at trying to mitigate that risk as we move through. A person might still be a close contact if they spent less than 15 minutes face-to-face, but you start to look at other factors. So if one or more of the people are not vaccinated, then the risk goes up in that space. If your PPE, if people weren't using masks or those sort of personal protective equipment properly, then obviously there is a greater risk of the virus being transmitted. So again, the risk factors go up. If you're in a small room or in close proximity with low ventilation, those sorts of things, again, your risk goes up in regards to the potential for the transfer of the virus. The specific variant of the COVID-19 virus, we know that we have Omicron kicking around at the moment. We still don't know enough about that at this point in time. This presentation and this conversation is about Delta and above. As more information comes in regards to the Omicron, then if there are any need to change those provisions, then certainly information will be provided as part of that process. But at this point in time, your COVID-Safe plan is your strongest defence around mitigating the risk of COVID in your workplace, and we'll work through what that looks like in a moment. Of course, the other side of it is if you've got two people who are face-to-face and they're yelling at each other, then there's lots of transfer of spittle, and as a consequence of that, the risk of transmission goes up. So there's some of the things that can increase the impact of what a close contact is. So the reason why we're talking about this is to try and minimise the close contacts and therefore minimise the impact on your business. Obviously, if you have close contacts in your business and you do have a case and you're identified as a close contact, well, that will have impact on your business. If 2 or 3 or 4 people become close contacts, then obviously that generates greater impact on the business. So what we're trying to do here is give you the tools you need in order to try and minimise that happening. So we'll talk a little bit more about trying to some of the strategies you can put in place to minimise either the time you're in close contact, or if you do need to get where you can't maintain that physical distancing, some of the things you can put in place to try and mitigate that. And the sort of things we're talking about is, where are those close points of contact? What are their processes? Can we manage the way people interact? And back in at the height of the pandemic in 2020, I know people were discouraging people to coming in and waiting in their room. They were getting them to wait in the cars, and they were sending a text message just to try and reduce the number of people in the shop and reducing that interaction. That's a really good example of the way you can help to mitigate your risk. I think it's really important to recognise that we're in a really difficult situation in Tasmania from the point of view that we've coming from a base where we're not used to dealing with COVID. We haven't had it in the state for a long period of time. It's now going to come in, and we've got to really start to focus in on our COVID-Safe plan and not be complacent in regards to the way we put our controls in place, because we will start to see it circulating through the community. The rate at which it circulates is still unknown. A lot of the controls we're putting in place at the moment will hopefully slow that rate of transfer. And if you've got a really good and strong, robust COVID-Safe plans with workers knowing what's expected of them and those controls being applied rigorously within the workplace, and the chances of you actually it impacting on your business can be significantly reduced. So we're going to work through that process now, and certainly one of the things that we will talk about, and I'll just touch on briefly, is the use of masks in reducing your risk. So masks are not mandated under public health directions, except if you're in at an event where there's over 1,000 people. But they are an effective way of reducing the risk of COVID transfer, particularly when you can't physical distance. So we talk about physical distance of 1.5. When we're talking about providing hairdressing services and beauty services and all those sort of things, the chances of actually maintaining 1.5 is pretty remote. So as we go through, you as a business owner might turn around and say, well, gee, if I want to reduce my close contacts, how do I do that? Or the impact of those close contacts, I need to maybe look at introducing masks within the workplace. I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm just suggesting that that's something that you may consider as part of your COVID safety plan in regards to trying to mitigate your risk. They're also a really good tool if you don't know what the COVID controls are within the workplace, or whether you're trying to mitigate the risk to other people coming in. You may have a clientele where you have vulnerable people, elderly people and those sort of things that are more susceptible to the virus. Certainly wearing your hairdressers wearing a mask when they're going through and doing their delivering their services could actually go a long way at putting your customers at ease, because they feel a little bit more protected. I was talking to someone the other day and I made the analogy that you go to your dentist and the dentist rocks up with the mask on and you don't think anything of it. I think more and more we will see as we move into this new phase that masks will become a little bit more of the norm, and particularly where there is the potential to be exposed to the virus or exposed where you can't maintain those physical distances. So as a business, it's certainly something that you should consider in regards to your controls. Moving into the other option are physical barriers. Physical barriers present a means to which the virus can't transfer across because there's a physical barrier there. They need to be cleaned frequently, but they're a little bit limited where you can use them, and you can a picture case. That's actually a restaurant where people are sitting in. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to go that far, but again, it highlights the issue that barriers can be a way of actually providing an additional level of protection. But again, it depends on your situation. We do see barriers popping up more and more in the retail area where you've got transient people passing through, buying their goods and then moving out. It provides a protection for the retail workers as part of that process. So let's go back to our original drawing. So we've identified the need to do a risk assessment, and we've spoken about some of the controls that we need to consider as part of that. So we're going to move now into actually doing a risk assessment. So what you should see on the screen now is a simple risk assessment template, and you'll see down the left-hand side, or what I've gone through and identified those sources of where COVID might enter in your business. So workers come to your workplace with COVID, customers come in with COVID, visitors or suppliers come in. You've got the need to have close contact with customers. You may have vulnerable workers in your workplace, so you may have people that may have an underlying health condition. You may have vulnerable people coming in for you to do the hairdressing and that sort of stuff. So it's a matter of just working through identifying those things that will have an impact on your business. Obviously, unvaccinated workers in the workplace will be a factor that you need to consider. And then workers needing to isolate or quarantine. What does that mean to your business? If all of a sudden, one or two of your staff are not able to be in the workplace, so how do you mitigate those sort of risks? Now you can see I've left this table, or it's quite blank. It's just lines, because obviously there are more risks depending on, or risk factors can be identified depending on the processes or the services you deliver, the nature of your business, who your customers are, and all that sort of stuff. So I've just started to pick out on the basic ones that would apply to a run-of-the-mill hairdressing salon. Now, when you go through the risk assessment process, what you're actually doing is looking at determining risk in the context of the likelihood of or probability that something will occur, and then the consequence or the impact that event will have. So you'll see here on this table, table A, it talks about likelihood, and it talks about low being minimal probability. Moderate is some probability that the event will happen, and then the final issue is significant or high, where you've got potential. Let's get rid of that dog out of the way. So that's where we talk about the likelihood of an event happening. Then we move into the consequence, and again, low consequence means minimal impact. Moderate consequence means some impact, and high impact means significant impact on your business. What we typically do then is we go along the matrix, and we say if we've got a low likelihood and a low consequence, then the green box tells us that the actual risk is low, and we apply that template at the bottom to actually quantify what the risk is, and we'll come back to that as we work through the table. So if you haven't quite got that, don't worry, it'll come back again. So what I've done is I've gone through, now we talk about this concept called gross and net risk. Gross risk is when you don't have any control. So if you don't have a COVID safety plan, you got COVID coming into the community, and then as a consequence of that, we then work through the process of saying, well, if we've got no controls in place, what's the risk of COVID coming in and having an impact on our business? So using the first one, so workers coming to the workplace with COVID-19. So if we have no controls in place, chances are they will get it through going out, doing the shopping, all that, they'll bring it into the workplace. So the risk is actually quite high. Then we look at the consequence. So if we get lots of workers in the workplace with COVID, again, the risk is high, the consequence is high, so therefore the net risk is high as well. So if you scan down without any controls, you can see that all our controls typically are in the red. Why? Because we don't have a COVID safe plan, we don't have any controls, we're going to have COVID circulating in the community, we've done nothing to stop it coming in, so it's a really bad situation to be. The last one that we'll talk, you'll see there that I've got green or low, which is vulnerable workers. So if you don't have any vulnerable workers in your workplace, then that's not really going to be a factor. So the risk is actually quite low at the gross level. Unvaccinated workers in the workplace, we'll touch on this a little bit more, I suspect, in the question and answer. But we're coming into a period where 92% of the population is expected to be vaccinated. If you're a small workplace, chances are all your people are vaccinated. So that maybe minimise the risk as we go through. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in the question and answer. So we've determined the gross risk. We've got lots of red. This is bad. Red is bad. So we now need to work out, well, what are we going to do in order to mitigate that risk? And that's where we then move across up into this space called the public health directions. So these are the requirements. So in a sense, public health is giving you the answers to the questions. So if you apply all the public health directions, they're all the controls. You put them in place, put them into your COVID safe plan, and you actually apply them rigorously. You're well on the way to managing your risks and getting rid of or mitigating those risks to the point where you're going to be able to continue to operate. COVID potentially could come into your workplace and leave your workplace without actually infecting anyone in your workplace because you've got the appropriate controls and processes there. So let's work through what that looks like. So we take the first one, workers come into your workplace with COVID-19. We've said that in the red is all high when we've got no controls. So what are the controls that we're putting to implement? Stay at home if unwell. This is a really, really, really big, important message to send to your workers and to your customers. If you've got people who are unwell when we have COVID circulating in our community, the last place you want them is in your workplace. So it's a matter of reinforcing that message to make sure that they're aware that they need to stay home if they're unwell. It's really useful to go through the exercise of actually training your staff around what are the symptoms of COVID so that they have a really good understanding. And as well as stay at home if unwell, you also need to get tested. Really strong message that you until you can confirm that you don't have COVID, you stay away from the workplace. The other controls that come into play, if you've got a small salon and all your workers are vaccinated, then the risk or the controls in that area, the risks of it being transmitted is low. We do know that being vaccinated doesn't stop the transfer of the virus, but it does minimise the impact, which means that it minimises the impact on your business should you have a case. Information, training and instruction, again, is really about making sure that workers understand that this is important. There's a whole lot of factors that, or the things that come into play, and they need to know what to do in order to mitigate that risk. You'll see I've broken it up into primary controls and secondary controls. So we've still got our hygiene factors. People need to wash their hands. They've got sanitizer needs to be available in the workplace. Sneezing and the protocols around all those sort of good hygiene factors all have a role to play in mitigating your risk. Cleaning the workplace, making sure people are using the QR codes, those sorts of things are all things that can influence. But the primary ones in regards to this particular issue is workers come to the workplace with COVID-19. So we'll move down the list. So what about customers coming into the workplace? Well, customers, we need, again, send the message. Stay at home if you're unwell. If they make an appointment, send them a text before or an hour before they're due to come into your workplace. Say, if you're unwell or you have these symptoms, please don't come in, just contact and we'll reschedule. Obviously, vaccination, again, minimises the impact on your business if your workers are vaccinated. Managing physical distancing. So when customers come in, if you're a Canadian, as I said, use them, let them wait in the car rather than wait in your room. Make sure you spread out the seats so there's physical distance being able to be maintained. Those are the sorts of things that make a distance in reducing the risk. As part of it, now obviously maintaining physical distancing may be an issue, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Visitors and suppliers coming into your workplace for COVID. Again, stay at home if they're not well. Change the time when they come in. If you've got reps selling your product and that sort of stuff, maybe you arrange they come in after the business where there's less impact when your workers have gone home, so that if they're in the workshop, they're not exposing your whole workplace. Those sorts of things where you, again, going back to minimising those close contacts, doing it virtually. Can you buy it over the internet, talking to people? They can still do their safety spiel, and then the stuff gets delivered, and you don't actually have that one-on-one close contact, which potentially puts your business at risk. Then we move down into the need for close contact, and this is a big one for the hairdressers and those beauty suppliers of beauty services. So for me, I actually think it's a little bit of a fait accompli that I think wearing a mask is something that you've really got to seriously consider if you really want to mitigate your risk in that area. But I think there's ways you can do it. You can put a sign up on the front counter or on the door that says, we are wearing masks for your safety and to reduce the risk of COVID-19. Those sorts of things are not unusual. As I said, we go to the dentist, we see people in masks, we go to other, and more they'll become a means when you are not able to provide that physical distancing. Something to consider, not mandated, but it's something to consider if you want to minimise that close contact. As I mentioned before, sending the text to the customers around staying at home if they're unwell is all part of that service delivery, but also making sure that you don't want someone sitting there coughing and spluttering and all that sort of stuff and showing signs of COVID, but you don't know whether they've got a COVID or they've got an allergy or whatever the case may be. And obviously vaccination of workers, as we spoke about before, they're able to, that will minimise the impact on the business. Now, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to keep rattling through here. So let's just get to the next step. Workers need to isolate. So there is an issue there that if you do have a close contact, then obviously they've got to go into isolation and quarantine for a period of time. The other thing that we haven't spoken about is casual contact. So when public health come in and do an assessment, if you've been identified that someone has come into your workplace has been infectious, they'll then do an assessment to determine who were the close contacts. So they'll ask who was the hairdresser working on the person, how was it managed, were they wearing masks, all that sort of stuff. But then they'll also look at things around saying, well, who was were there any casual contact? So a casual contact is someone who has been in the same place as a confirmed case during their infectious period, but does not meet the requirements of a close contact, i.e. they haven't spent 15 minutes in direct face-to-face contact. And what will typically happen then, if you're identified as casual contact, which may well be most of your other staff, there will be, there's a requirement to get tested, but you can continue to work, but you need to wear a mask for 14 days with periodic testing. So again, you're able to, if you do have someone that comes into your shop, it's not an automatic shutdown of the whole shop. There'll be this analysis to work out who's a close contact. They will need to be removed from the workplace. You'll need to go through and do your normal cleaning around all those touch points. And then those who are potentially identified as a casual contact will be asked to wear a mask, but they can continue to work. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. I will keep moving. So once we've gone through and identified our gross risks and all the red bits, we then identified our controls. Now we then go through and run the same process over the likelihood and consequence. So what we're actually doing is saying we're applying the same metrics with a view of quantifying the level of risk at the end. Here's an example where we then go through back to our workers coming in. So initially they were high because we had no controls. We've educated our workers. We've got a stay at home at home well. We've got vaccinated workers. We've got good, strong COVID safety plan in place. So what's the likelihood of that the virus infecting the business? Low. What's the impact? The vaccinated workers will have a lower impact. We've got good messages. So the consequence is reduced, and a low and a low equals a low. So you've taken a high risk situation, we've applied the controls, and as a consequence of that, we now have reduced the risk of workers bringing COVID into the workplace. We move on to the next one with the customers. Again, same thing. Stay at home in unwell. We've got vaccinated workers. We try and maintain physical distancing. We can't maintain physical distancing. We will provide masks. So therefore, we assess the likelihood of customers bringing it is moderate. The consequence is low because we've got vaccinated workers. Therefore, we've lowered the risk to moderate. Now, this is just my assessment. When you go through it, you might have a different view. You might say, well, actually, I think it's not going to be a low risk or consequence. It might be still moderate. It doesn't really matter. This is about making a subjective call and then being consistent as you way through to work out what your risks are. We move down to need to close contact. So again, we've gone through the process of saying, well, what's the likelihood of if we've got using masks, we've got people staying home, we've got vaccinated workers, what's the likelihood of that transmission occurring? We've gone from a high down to a low. The consequence, well, if people get it, they may become a close contact because they're in close proximity. If they're not wearing their mask properly, or there was a breakdown and they do get it, so that might still be moderate, but it still reduces the risk from the red down to the green or the orange. And you can see you work your way down through that process to get to the point where you've now gone from all high risk to now you're actually starting to manage the risk, and you've also got a whole heap of controls in place that apply. The last one I want to dwell on is we're going to talk about the need for quarantining. So we've said that's high. The impact on the business is still high, but because if you've got quarantine, if you've got vaccinated workers, then that can have lower the impact. If you have unvaccinated workers, then obviously that increases your risk because they need to quarantine for longer. They're also going to get potentially the impact on the virus and will be greater. And there's probably greater transmissibility in regards to the virus for unvaccinated people. So then putting that in some context, if you were thinking about, well, maybe I need to go to mandatory vaccination, but if you've got 4 workers and 3 are vaccinated, then you run the risk assessment over this process and see, well, what's the impact of having this one person unvaccinated, and it'll guide you down the path of making a decision whether, you know what, we need to mandate vaccinations, or if you've already got everyone vaccinated, there's no need to mandate it because you've already achieved it. And as I said, 92% of the population before the borders open will be vaccinated. So have that conversation with your staff, get them to understand why you need to know, how it impacts on your risk assessment, how it impacts on the continuity of the business, and then you can make some informed decisions. So we're rocketing along. We've done our risk assessment. We've taken consideration our public health directions. So now we're building our COVID-safe plan. Our COVID-safe plan talks about all those things that we spoke about as controlled, managing physical distances, density requirements, staying at home if unwell, hygiene, cleaning, all those sorts of things we've identified. So then how do we make a COVID-safe plan? If you go to our website, we have a template which allows you to fill it out and you can work your way through documenting what controls you have in place. If you come across other controls, i.e. you want to use barriers or you want to use masks or whatever, they're able to be added into the COVID Safe Plan template. We've gone to a very simple process where it's just tick the boxes to make it really easy, and all you do is run through and say, yep, I do that, yep, I do that, yep, I do that, and then make sure that you actually apply that and you've gone through it with your workers. If you've already got a COVID safe plan and you just want to update it on the things that have changed recently, which are typically obviously the vaccination status of workers, the use of QR codes within the industry, and for the health and beauty that's been mandated for a period of time anyway, and the ventilation is another new one where you might want to look at how ventilation can apply in your workplace. Now when we talk about ventilation, we're talking about reducing the concentration of the virus in the air, and you can do that by having your air conditioning on and pumping more air in, by opening a door, open a window, allowing for a greater dilution of the virus that may be in the air. So they're two documents that are available. You get them from WorkSafe, tas.gov.au. I also strongly encourage you to have a look at the coronavirus.tas.gov.au website, because that gives you a lot of useful information in regards to definition of close contacts, what happens if you have a case, how it will be managed, and those sorts of things. And on the basis of that, I'm done, albeit a little bit later.
Thanks a lot, Brad. You're actually just on time.
Oh, okay, cool.
So now we've got about 20 minutes for Q&A. So if you've got a question for Brad, just put up your electronic hand or your real hand, and we'll pick you out.
Wow.
You've answered all the questions, Brad.
Well, that was the intention. I was hoping to be able to sign off on all those things that were...
Marianne, have you got a question?
Yeah.
Yep.
What about unvaccinated people coming into your business? Of course, it's not mandated. What do we do there? Do we have any rights to say they cannot come into our business?
Okay, so there's a couple aspects to this. So the first one is that we need to recognise that 92% of the population will be vaccinated. So we're only talking about a very small proportion that aren't. The other thing that we need to consider is unvaccinated workers have a higher risk of transferring the virus, but people who are vaccinated are also have a risk or transmit the virus. Even if you turn around and choose to say, right, if you're not vaccinated, you don't come into my workplace, you still have a risk of the virus entering your workplace. So it doesn't eliminate the risk. If you're going to go through the process of pulling on the argument or the approach of saying, no, unless you're vaccinated, you don't come in, I would suggest you get legal advice in that space, because there are a few traps in that area, and you want to be on good, solid legal ground in that space, because at the moment, public health directions mandate those areas where it is a requirement. For all others, it's based around how you want to manage your business, how you assess your risk, and as part of that process, getting legal advice in regards to making sure that you've got all the appropriate mitigating controls in place form part of that discussion.
Yeah, that was my question, because I've already had clients saying, surely you're not going to let unvaccinated people into your business. And I said, well, there could be ramifications under, you're discriminating against these people. So That was just a question that I was thrown at by quite a few of my clients, and didn't really know how to answer it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think we're seeing more and more businesses heading down that path, either rightly or wrongly. I'm not going to make any judgment in that space, but as you go down that path, I would strongly recommend that you do it based on your risk assessment, you do it based on mitigating the risk to your business, and you do it fully informed by legal advisors in that space.
Yeah, well, that was the other thing, like, because you do have legal responsibilities, these people, that that's the other big thing. So I just want to be able to say to my clients, no, I'm not doing that because it's not mandated.
And I think it's really quite, well, you're right, it's not mandated. And I think it's really important that your COVID safety plan is the best way of mitigating the risk. So you go through the process of aggregating up all the controls around educating your workers, educating your staff, putting all those controls in place. You've got a good solid foundation for if the virus does come in, it's able to be, it may be in your area, but it's gone because you've limited the ability to transfer to people. You've cleaned the area where the virus has been. You've tried to mitigate the risk wherever possible.
Yep.
There's going to be lots of examples where it's circulating in the community and it's coming in and moving around in the community. The ability as to whether or not it has an impact on your business is very much driven by your COVID safe plan.
Yep. Thank you.
Roseanne, you had a question?
Yes, I did have a question, and it's just again in that same scenario. My thoughts are providing duty of care to all of our clients and our staff and their families and our businesses. If we have a client that is unvaccinated, I'm sort of feeling we're happy to welcome them into the salon, but can we ask, even though it's not mandatory, would they mind wearing a mask whilst they visit the salon if they're unvaccinated? Without having to get legal advice. Yeah, we're not mandating it, but we would prefer if that was the case.
And I think the whole risk assessment process, and particularly the risk assessment that I worked through, I worked it around the consultant wearing the mask. But if you want to have that conversation with your customers and they're happy to wear a mask, that reduces your risk even further. And certainly that's something that you may wish to entertain. But again, it's what's reasonably practicable from depending on what services you're providing. But certainly if you're able to, and you've got customers that are happy to wear a mask whilst you're going through that and both parties are wearing it, well, your close contacts and that assessment, the risk is a lot lower because you've mitigated that risk. So strongly encourage those conversations. And if we can get to the point where we're educating our customers that that's what's required, better place to be.
Okay, thank you very much.
Brad, you and I had a quick chat about the other day, and I was talking to a legal person, although I don't have it in writing, but I understand that other than the conventional discriminatory things, race, creed, colour and all that sort of thing, a business may exclude anybody they like from their business at any time. So if at the end of the day you have chosen through your risk assessment that you would prefer to exclude people who are unvaccinated, you are able to do that, and the person must leave the business. But again, that's general advice, not legal advice.
Yeah, I'll stick to my answer that I provided earlier on, Robert.
Any further questions? Michelle? Oh, you're on mute, Michelle.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Just checking about the physical distancing, because at one stage last year we had to be 1.5 metres apart, and then we went to more capacity within the, I can't think of the word, what it's called, but we were allowed to have so many per square metre. Back to physical distancing, are we mandating that we're going to go back to having to be 1.5 metres apart again? Or we can mandate that we wear masks if we're that close, or how do we get around that?
Okay, so the first measure is density requirements. So there has always been the density requirement about one person per 2 square metres within your salon. So you still need to do your calculation, work out how many people you're allowed in the workplace. You need to stick the sign on the door to say no more than the X number of people in the workplace. So that's the starting point. Then there's a requirement around maintaining physical distancing of 1.5 so far as is reasonably practicable. So there are times when you cannot do that, and obviously when you're doing someone's hair, potentially is a really good example where you're not able to maintain that 1.5. So at that point, you then start to say, well, what other controls can I put in place in order to mitigate the risk? And that's when we start to talk about whether masks are an option and those sort of things. I suspect that we'll see, as we start to see more and more cases in the community, you'll see people wearing masks in supermarkets and those high volume areas where you can't guarantee that you're going to maintain that 1.5 metre distance. So in the absence of that, you're looking at other controls to apply. So the short answer is density requirements are a mandated requirement, and then physical distancing where you can, but noting there are times when you can't, and then putting other controls in place to mitigate that risk.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. What else do I have here? I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. I dropped out a few times, and I'm not sure if we're going to cover this if we actually do have cases and the cleaning processes and what we have to go through.
Okay.
If we have somebody in and what's expected of us from that point of view.
Okay, so we'll run through if there is a case, and that way we'll cover off on all that. So typically what will happen is a worker or someone's saying it's not feeling well, they go and get tested. They get confirmed through the testing that they're infectious. So therefore, public health will typically make contact with the person, try and identify where they've been. They'll look at the QR codes. They'll look at all that information. They'll gather information in regards to the potential points of transfer. You'll probably get a call from public health saying that we've now got a case, and they'll talk to you about close contacts versus casual contacts and those sort of things. I would suggest that you need to be working on if you do get contacted, then it may be worthwhile putting everyone in masks in regards to until they finalise their assessment, because if you've got a close contact in your workplace that has been infectious or infected, they are infectious and they may have a flow-on effect within your business. So masks are always a good way to mitigate that risk. Once they've identified who is a close contact, then they will come out of the workplace and go into quarantine and go through the testing and that sort of stuff. If they've been identified as a casual contact, which it typically would be a small salon, I would imagine, then obviously there'll be a requirement to put on masks and to get tested at periodic over the 14 days. The cleaning requirement is that you just go through your normal cleaning regime, but you might put a little bit more rigour into making sure that you're a bit more thorough in regards to the way you do it. So frequently touched surfaces, making sure you're using cleaning and disinfectant in regards to mitigating the risk, and then going over the counters, the door handles, all those areas where the chairs and all that. But they're all things that you should be doing anyway. When the customer gets up and moves on, you should be going through and doing those cleaning before the next customer comes in. You don't need to do anything more than that. There is no deep clean, there's no shutdown till you get contractors in to clean it or whatever. It's purely just you need to have good cleaning protocols in place, and then you're able to continue to operate. If you have somebody who is identified as a close contact, one of your workers, they disappear, you'll get advice from public health around the impact on the other people in the business, but it's quite legitimate that your business could continue to operate with those after you've done your clean, and because they're casual contacts, they may need to wear a mask as part of their response to that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Roseanne?
Yes, I've just got one more. What's the density again? One person per...
1 person per 2 square metres of floor space.
Yeah, thank you.
Just one more for me.
Was that Marianne?
Yes, me again. I have a person that rents a chair off me, and she bought in a cleaning product called Sabco Ultra Shield Pro. Apparently, it's supposed to give the surface like that you clean up to 200 touches that you don't have to clean every time. Do you think that would be effective?
I don't know the product, but I would suggest that cleaning after each time that it's used would be a much more effective way of doing. I don't know the chemical composition. Typically, disinfectant products need to have 70% alcohol, and that's the starting point. Now, if this product claims, and you can cite the data, and that's what they're alleging, well, I'm not going to argue with it. I don't know the product, but I would be encouraging cleaning processes after each client.
Which I do, yep. Thank you.
Any more questions?
You got anything?
All right, I might now ask Kelly Brown from Business Tas to just give you an update on the support that Business Tasmania can provide.
Thanks, Mark, and hi everyone. So I manage Business Tasmania. It's a service within the Department of State Growth which you can all access if you haven't already started accessing it, or anyone else you know in business or other people who would like to get started in business can come to the Business Tasmania team as many times as they want for anything little, anything big. It's all confidential and free. So what I'm going to do is share my screen so I can have the website up in the background, and that I can lead you through a few things on the screen. So can you see the website now? Yep, great, perfect. Okay. So we, since March 2020, we've played a lead role in helping thousands of businesses understand what it meant to adapt to COVID, basically. So we are that central point to come to. So as the borders open, and when they are open, if you have any questions at all, whether that be if there are changes in public health directions and you're not sure, if the density limit changes, anything at all that you might hear about on the news, you might read about on the coronavirus website, which is a source of truth when it comes to coronavirus changes in the community, please call. You can see our 1-800 phone number, our email. You can come through to us, and that's why we're there. We're there to help you understand, not just about particularly about COVID and what it means, but to make it easier for you to adapt in your workplace. We work really closely with WorkSafe Tasmania, so they provide a range of support and guidance in regards to risk assessments and safety plans. But what we do is actually help you with anything at all other than that, obviously what WorkSafe do. So anything business related, if you've got a question or you're just not sure where to go to, come through to us. So you can see from the website, we are also a point of contact for a range of funding that the department offers, so up at the top right-hand corner, and also COVID-related emergency funding opportunities. So we're that point of contact. So please have a look if you're not already there and familiarise yourself with support that may be on offer. A key part of our role is also being really proactive and letting you know when there's a change in the community that you must know about in regards to how you run your business, or if there's a new opportunity, if there's a new program that's relevant for you, we would send that out in our newsletter. So if you don't already subscribe to it, I'd strongly encourage you to here. That is how you will know what's happening. And so you've got the finger on the pulse. We certainly are very active on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, but particularly the newsletter is a very comprehensive, easy to read guide on what is happening. Check in Tas app. We also help you with any questions in relation to Check-in Tas app. Last week you may have read about a new physical card that people in the community can actually ring up the public health hotline and order. So if they don't have a smartphone, you might have someone come into your business with a new card, and if you have a device in your salon and you have your business profile there, you can actually scan that card, and that's the way in which those people can check in. That's it's another way in which they can, it's easier for them. But if you don't have a device, fully appreciate not everyone does, and that's totally fine. You would use an alternative contact tracing check-in method, such as pen and paper, unless they're with someone that has a smartphone. In this area here, you'll actually find a whole host of COVID information. Of particular, I'd like to point out, if you haven't already viewed them, is the reopening guidance videos that we filmed with WorkSafe last week. So they are, obviously we've covered a lot today, but these actually recap. There's a whole suite of videos there, hot off the press. So these recap on everything that Brad's covered and more. So you can go there and have a look when you've got time, watch back over them, and let other people know it's all there. So this information, there's a whole host of information here which leads off to WorkSafe or the coronavirus website. So there's a lot of great support which is easy for you to find. So aside from being that point of contact when there is a significant disruption such as COVID, we provide a whole host of regular support to start and run businesses. We have a range of, we have excellent business advisors in our Enterprise Centre Tasmania service. They can actually work with you face to face, no cost, and talk to them about any aspect of running your business. Could be a new idea, could be a challenge, and that's 5 hours free every year. So please let us know if you'd like to access that service every year. Also, one to quickly point out is the Digital Ready program, and that is around strengthening your online presence to attract more customers. And as online changes all the time, this is another excellent free program you can be accessing at the same time. So we are, I guess, to take away is that anything at all support-wise, business-related, come through, let's have a conversation with the team, and they will tailor the support to best meet your needs. And so that's why we exist, to make it as easy as possible for you to know where to go to for support. So that's a really quick run through, but there are details there, so please do access what we offer.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And so just to finish up, I'll hand over to Robert for any final remarks.
Well, thanks very much, Mark. Yes, kudos to Kelly and the team at Business Tasmania. I'm not quite sure exactly what happens with some other states, but I'm pretty sure that we actually have one that kicks butt in every other place in Australia. So it's a very easy crowd to deal with and lots of good stuff. And here in Beauty Tas and Tas Small Business Council make regular reference to the website. So we get a lot of our good quality information from there because that is, you so rightly said, it's the place to go. Brad, can I thank you very much for your time, the effort you've put into it, and look forward to being in touch tomorrow or seeing the presentations and the slides, and also encouraging people to go to get those templates already written in some respects or set out, because there's nothing worse than a blank page when you're doing these things. So good start. Just one question on that, and look, will there be auditing of the risk management, or we've now assuming that everybody's mature enough in fact that they can get on, they can do it, it's their risk, get on and make sure you've got it for the safety of yourself and the rest of your customers? Or will workplace standards be out there auditing a bit the same as they were early days with the COVID safety plans?
We'll still continue to have our COVID unit out and about, but the goal here is to assist businesses and to manage the risk and provide that additional support. If people, I suspect that, I hope if you take nothing out of the presentation that I provided tonight, was more about if you do nothing, then the chances are COVID's going to have a pretty significant impact on your business, and it's going to be pretty difficult to continue to operate. So as with Business Tas, we've got resources available to assist, and we'll certainly be putting them out into the marketplace and making sure that we can provide as much support as we possibly can.
Well done. Thank you. As I say, thanks Department of State Growth, thanks Mark, and thank you everybody for their interest in coming on and trying to learn to make your businesses even that much better. Good night, and it's time to go and have some tea, I think.
Thank you, everyone.
See you.
Thank you.
We're done.
We do.
That was pretty good.